Hello, this is Catherine Haines speaking here, and I work with EULAR a lot as their educationalist, and I work with my colleague Loreto Carmona. And on this first slide, which I hope you can see now, and on the flyer, I selected a picture, a photograph from when I was with Loreto in Salamanca last year. We are looking particularly relaxed and I hope friendly and approachable and above all kind, because that's what we wanted to get across to you, to invite you to join our activities where we are trying to help to create a constructive atmosphere where we can coach each other and devise better ways of communicating what sometimes is very complex information. Now, whenever you look on YouTube or in the business world, the advice for presentation is do without words or details altogether. Just show a picture of a fast car. That will do if you want to sell people something, but if you wish to convince an audience of experts of your credibility and your technical expertise, that you need to have rather more tricks and skills up your sleeve. And it's that sort of presentation that we're thinking of here. So overall, our aim, a lot of EMEUNET members requested sessions about presenting. It's very topical. Many of you participated in submitting posters and presentations for this virtual Congress. So our aim in the next hour is to help you think about giving better explanations of your work in typical conference situations, and that often means presentation. So we have some outcomes as a result of spending time with us. You should be better able to describe what makes a presentation great and be able to choose and create good supporting media, good pictures, good tables, good material to get your message across. You will be able to evaluate your own presentations and evaluate other people's and learn from them. We also have found a lot of extra resources that are very rich, and I will ask my EMEUNET colleagues to tell you at the end how you can easily access that material because it's embedded in these slides. So in outline, I'm going to talk a very short presentation here at the start, and because what I want to create is a problem and solution structure. I want to establish, first of all, with a bit of online chat to make sure that we can see if we all have similar problems that we're trying to solve here. Now, Loreto and I, between us, have probably seen well over 1,000 hours of presentations. And in order for you to complete your medical training, you will have seen many hundreds of hours. So we are all experts, and yet we regularly see the same problems. And they are problem number one, too much information, cramming too much in. And the second problem I see regularly is that the audio visuals don't actually aid understanding. They sort of get in the way often. And that is definitely something many people can improve on. And the final problem I see regularly is that people do not manage to round things off with a satisfying closing section. I have my fingers crossed that we will be able to do that today, because the last thing we want is for the microphone to be pulled, because that is not satisfying. So here's my first question to you then, what I want to find out from you, and here's what I want to invite you to submit to the chat right now. So what is your biggest problem in giving a presentation? What's brought you here this evening? Or perhaps just to recognize the problems that I've mentioned. Or do you have more problems we can solve? If you tell us about this now, in the next minute or two, we can try and address these as we go along. And Loreto will be gathering these up and telling us about them in a moment. So Loreto, have we got any comments coming in from people?
Oh yes, here they are. How to start? How to start is always troublesome. I have had problems with ending in time in trying to fit enough info on a short presentation. I like these others. They say, I get very nervous and I forget information. I tend to talk too fast because my heart's racing and I'm always scared that time will be over. And keeping track of time when you're looking at the audience. But basically, I would say that most of them is a lot of information to fit in a short time.
Okay, so it seems as if we have magically predicted, based on our empirical experience, many of these issues. Thank you, everybody. Lovely to know that you are there in the silence of virtual presentation. Now, in an ideal world, we could help you and coach you because the real answer to getting over the nerves you experience at the start of any talk or any performance is that you must practice it enough numbers of times until you reach the right point on a performance curve, so that you do not become too nervous to do the job well, but just nervous enough to do the job really well. And what I normally recommend is that whenever you are in any type of group, and heaven knows that's not going to be for a while, that you try and put your hand up and speak, ask a question. And this is to make sure you take every opportunity to practice presenting and getting over a slight nervousness without having to wait a whole year or many months for the next formal presentation opportunity. So look for informal opportunities, and that will help you build your experience. Now, I'm going to show you my most important slide of the whole event. So here goes. This is my key slide. And the key message is, we were just talking about you and your breathing calmly and centering yourself. Well, actually, it's not about you anymore. It's about them. In fact, the whole key to this is your audience and being able to understand who they are and what they want from you. So my number one tip before making any presentation, and this really is the key to being able to choose what you are able to exclude so that you don't try and put too much in, is to make sure that you know and have defined as fully as possible who is going to be sitting there in your audience. So who are they? What do they know already? How expert are they? What can you take for granted that they will already be familiar with? What could you remind them of lightly and then build further on? And how successful you are in doing that will really help you manage the volume of material. My next point here about what mood shall I set, I've already mentioned. I think in the conference setting and in many professional meetings, the mood you want to set is, I am a trustworthy, competent professional and I am worth listening to. And that is what you want to convey. And when you're in person, you do that by having a steady and calm voice where you're not breathing too hard and speaking too quickly. And when you're in public, you do that by standing very calmly on both feet, firmly on the ground, and make sure you're taking in deep breaths and look calm in your body language. Now, the next point is that you should be absolutely clear what is your take home, your desperately important key point. Now, sometimes you have enough time to make 3. What a luxury. I think with the virtual congress, things are cut to the bone. Posters are 2 minutes. Presentations are 5 minutes. And so you really have to have just one key point and make sure you make it. So what do they already know? That's what I've mentioned already. And then how can I make them want to listen to me? And so we need to motivate even the most friendly audiences. We need to think of why it's important for them to know something, mention how useful it is to them, and use is what they can then do with it. And it's always worth coming to a conclusion by making sure you've checked that you've got your key points across. So that's my absolutely key slide. And I'm now going to move on just to tackle these problems one at a time. So our first problem is trying to cram too much in. So of course, I recommend that we find ways to limit the information. And then all you have to do, everything else is simpler. You just have to illustrate it well and then just check that it's been received. So it's all in that first point, limiting that information. And this is the best advice I've ever been given, is that less is more. So you just focus on what they really need, because the more you try and tell them, the less effective you are. And the feedback from my professor was always, I'd say, could you look at my slides? Could you give me some advice? And without looking at them, he would just say, remove some slides, less is more. And even with this presentation, I removed some slides because less is more. Now, I'm going to give you an activity now. I'm going to try and prove that less is more. And I'm going to do that by giving you an example that has very kindly been shared with us of a presentation in its before and after state. Now, this is very kind of somebody to let us do this, so we are very appreciative. And I'm just going to say that the before presentation is absolutely competent. It is a very reasonable and good presentation. It is not there to say, oh, look, ha ha, how terrible this is. But the after presentation illustrates many things we want to get across to you about how to cut information down, illustrate it as well as possible, and make sure that actually the message gets across. So what I'm going to do is try and run these slides very quickly. So each slide is going to last 2 seconds. So don't be alarmed. I'm not expecting you to get all of the information out of this. What I want you to get is a speeded up experience of how we create cognitive overload, which is unproductive. This is a graphic on the right here, which shows where your eyes go when you are reading something. They characteristically follow an F. And when you watch this this set of slides, you will be aware of your eyes moving very fast to take the information in. So are you willing to do this experiment with me now? And afterwards, I'm going to ask you to vote and tell us if you liked the before or the after. So this is going to take about a minute to show each one. So you can sit back and enjoy. There's no music or anything, just the slides going by. So just let them, and let's hope that this works. It did before. Here we go. So that was a perfectly competent, tasteful, using the nice EULAR templates, perfectly lovely presentation. But let's have a look at what it looked like in the after state, and then we can share some observations. So here we go. This should be a little quicker. What did you think? Comments. Did you like the before or the after? What did you observe?
Well, Catherine, they seem to like the after because they have bigger fonts, graphics, nicer, concise, stressing the points, graphics, less text, more concise, more appealing, bigger numbers. The construction of the slides, attention to several points at the same time. Yeah.
Well, I'm really pleased that they thought that. Of course, you don't have to agree. And at first, it's a bit surprising that you can put such dense information over so visually. But I think it was a very good illustration of how to do that without belittling or undermining the seriousness of the content. So yes, all of those aspects, we're now going to look at how to continue to keep using those. So number one task, reduce the amount of information you try and fit in. And then your main task is just to organize it and structure it in the best way possible. So let's just think about structuring for a moment. Of course, the most basic structure is beginning, middle, and end. Even if you have a 2-minute poster presentation, you need a beginning and a middle and an end. Even answering a question in 30 seconds, you need a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that is, in fact, a mini presentation. But here we go. It's good to do things in threes, tell people what you're going to tell them about, tell them, and then just summarize what you've told them. The brain likes threes. When we communicate orally, that's how it helps us remember. It's how we structure stories. It's how we expect things. And even so, we need to keep reminding our listener why they should listen, how they're going to use what they know, what's happening in changing of sections. Are we making progress? Are we near the end? Is this the bit where we have to know what to do with this information later? Make sure you give only as much detail as it's feasible and possible to do in the time available. Group all the information that belongs together. Make sure you have pauses in what you say, or white space is the equivalent of a pause on the screen. And white space and pauses help people to take in the messages. And if you can possibly unify or bring everything together into one overall diagram or image that encapsulates your overall message, that is excellent too. So anybody got any further tips for us to remember to make sure you don't try and include too much? I'm thinking of things similar to my professor saying, any feedback on any presentation is take out some more slides now. Anybody else got any tips to share at this point?
We have a question here related to what you just said, Catherine.
Yeah.
So what do you think of starting with an outline of my presentation? Sometimes it's interesting, but sometimes it's a little bit redundant.
Yes, I think an outline is an interesting thing. When you're teaching, an outline is very important because the outline is the plan of what you are going to achieve with respect to time. So it's not the same as what you intend to achieve, which is not matched to time. So in this, I gave an outline to say, expect to be doing some practical activities and joining in and chatting. In a talk, you might want to say, I'm going to spend the first 5 minutes recapping on things so that everybody who is here is starting from the same point. And then I am going to spend the remaining 7 minutes telling you about what my research is doing to take that forward. So I do think sometimes that kind of direction is very helpful to share that with your audience so they know what to expect.
Yeah, the comments that we get are not much related about what are your tips for making sure you don't try to include much information. Somebody's asking how to find the images that look professional. We can give you some tricks afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Sebastian is suggesting that you can put the outline at the bottom of your slides and then advance as you're giving the presentation. That yeah, that might help.
Yeah, quite often I think having the outline displayed as well as the detail. That's how I would do it if I had people all day.
Yeah.
And then I would show you how I'm moving through that outline. Yeah.
Yes, and Desiree says that no more than 6 to 8 lines of text by slide, which is yeah, it's a good tip.
Yes, very good. And in fact, the one that we saw as the after slides, they had far fewer words on each slide than is the recommended minimum. It used to be 5 to 7 words each line, and no more than 5 to 7 lines on a page, based on how working memory was empirically measured as operating. However, we don't want people to be working at the limits of their mental capacity. So if you can do it in many fewer words and a picture, choose that. Okay, well, let's move on, because these ideas will come up again. I just want to share one thing with you. I'm not going to share these, but I looked on TED Talks. We've got explaining quantum physics to a 7-year-old, and that's without any slides at all. In fact, interestingly, I think most of the TED Talks communicate without slides. I just wanted to raise that possibility. And quite often these days, especially in virtual communication, we might produce things that are completely animated, and therefore you don't have to be there to present that information. So I was on the quantum physics theme, so I included a little YouTube thing there for you to see. But I now wanted to share a couple of my favourite slides, and then I've asked Loreto to share her favourite very topical slide. I'm then going to share some effective pictorial slides with you, and then we've got an example of how to cram fascinating information into a great table. So here goes. Here's one of my favourite slides, and it's from 1350. So I might use this slide to introduce anything about communicating with people in formal settings or education or lecturing, because here is the University of Bologna in 1350, but here we have human behaviour alive and well, somebody asleep, people chatting, some people texting and going asleep on the back row, all the things that human beings have done through the history of time. And it just makes a point and gets people to focus on what I want to tell them. So I tend to use that slide as a light introduction, and sometimes that kind of thing is helpful. But often audio visuals are not actually helping. And the answer to the problem of audio visuals that don't help is you've got to limit that information, choose the best way to illustrate those limited ideas, and then make sure it's working as you intended. So let's, as I've given you a highlight, have a look. So I also use this graphic design, which is the London Underground, and I used this. You can get any of these things from Creative Commons, from your good old insert from online. And I would use this to introduce computer hardware, which I used to teach. And I would promise everybody in the room that nothing I would ever teach them about computer hardware would be more complicated than the picture I was about to show them. And I absolutely knew they all understood that picture completely and used it every day. I was teaching in London. And then I'd show them this slide, and it was to create a sense of relief and purpose and confidence in the complexity of the information I was going to share with them. So this is an absolutely amazing design in terms of how much complexity it has managed to organise. It's got a very clear point. It shows complexity with economy, and we're looking for similar marvellous unifying graphical designs. They tend to follow the same design principles, and if you look at these pictures on the left here, you may have experienced your eyes moving in these ways when you were watching those speedy before and after presentations. So just generally keep it simple, Leave lots of white space, organise it, make the eye follow that interesting path, make something stick out, and make sure that the screen is divided up in an interesting way. So I've asked Loreto now to talk to us about her most used slide this year. We probably don't have time to go through all the intricacies and so on, but of course we wanted something that was very relevant. So Loreto, over to you to tell us about your this year's most used slide.
So I think everybody have seen this slide before, and I love it because you can, just by looking at the top of it, you can get an idea of what the COVID disease works, right? It starts with the viral response, then the pulmonary phase and the inflammatory response. And underneath, you have the clinical symptoms in one line, the signs, and then the treatment. So I've been using this, and it's very easy to walk through it.
This is a slide I've included because something which might work well in a textbook or as a poster will not work when it is in a different medium. So often things that are used as slides, we think they are great because we've looked at them in a book, but they are not great when they are projected on a slide. So we must remember not that things cannot, we have to translate them so that they work in the new medium. I'm going to come back to Loreto in a moment, but I just want to share with you another image which Manouk found for us, which is to illustrate ultrasound information, which is obviously a common need.
In this case, it's MRI information, but
I beg your pardon. Thank you. Now I'm pressing buttons. Are there more bits that come into? Right. Yes. So it's dynamic. Do you want to say something about this, Manouk?
Yes, well, when we have image, even if it's an MRI or an X-ray or ultrasound or whatever, it's very difficult to just have the focus have the focus of your audience on what you are talking about if there is just an image. So that's why I would advise to use circles, and also in this example use the name of what kind of lesion you are talking about. So that people know where to look also if they are not familiar with X-rays or MRIs and how to look at them, or not familiar with the disease. That's pretty much.
Thank you. So even something which, you know, it's very visual, you expect your audience to get it. In fact, they need a lot of direction and specific signposts, literally, in order to see what you want them to see in the picture. So thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to try and hand over control now to Loreto, or that she can tell me when to move slides.
Yeah, don't worry. It will be.
So here we go. We're going to try and make the world a simpler place for tables.
Yeah. So pass the next slide. Sometimes we have problems with the methods, and we tend to put a lot of things in test. Pass next slide. So one thing that we can do is to first start partition it with the bullets. Next slide. Next slide. More bullets, more abbreviation, Next slide. Highlight if you want or not. Next slide. But the best thing, it will be an image. So the same test can go in a graphic that you can actually walk the illustration for. Okay, so methods can also go into images, and it will be easier to explain in a in this kind of graphic than actually in test. Okay, next slide. Then we are going to see how to clean tables. So we are going to see in the next slide one big, which will be the checklist. So you have to understand that they have to be self-explanatory, use footnotes, avoid putting too much information and things that are unnecessary, try to remove columns, avoid repetitive elements, and use indentation for blocks of information. Okay, so next slide. This is a table taken from directly from a paper called Nest. Nest. When you put it into a PowerPoint table, you get it like this. Go next slide. You can clean it. The only thing that I did here is to take the p-values columns out, because in fact all of them have significant p-values, and you can see there are asterisks in the different variables that are that have significant p-values. Next slide. Here I indented, put blocks of information. Now you can see that there are not thousands of variables, there are only 4 variables. And then I took the cost in dollars out of each one of the columns and I put it on top. So now it's clear what is the content of the columns. Next slide. Now I took the content cost in US dollars to the heading of the slide. I took a lot of decimals out. In fact, I even took the standard deviations. You can do this or not, but here is clear which are the large numbers. You can see that living in an institution or more than 10 years of disease duration is the largest boxes. Next slide. But you can always show the same slide in different figures. Here you have very clear information that disease duration, if it's less than 2 years or more than 10 years, it's the greatest increase. Next slide. Social support, living in an institution is the highest burden. And next slide. And housework tasks are also decreasing the cost. So if you do everything at home, then the cost decrease. So with 3 figures, you have explained a whole table, and it's much easier to walk through the figures than to walk through a table. So try not to put tables, right? Okay. Thank you, Catherine.
So the answer for how to do effective tables is to try and avoid them altogether. So
at least
if we can
in a presentation.
Yes, and what those 2 examples nicely show is that an awful lot of words can be transformed into very communicative pictures, diagrams, or other graphical ways to show information. Okay, so we wanted to share some examples with you for how to get great graphics and other audiovisual devices to do a lot of your work for you. And we wondered if you had any examples or thoughts to share at this point.
Well, Lucy has a problem with tables in which results have a lot of text, and the only way to get rid of text is getting rid of text. That's so you have to trim and trim and trim and trim and trim, or put it into different tables. But you cannot fit a whole big table with the 16 and by 16 on the screen. That's impossible.
Now, I've been working at the University of Oxford this year, and I have noticed what I have learnt about communication there is worth sharing at this point. They, in everything they write and everything they publish within the university, it is all beautifully written. And what they do, it's not big words, long sentences, it's the opposite. It is the shortest, clearest, most simple way to express what they mean. The thing is that they thought about what they're going to say so carefully, and then they match their quality thought with the simplest, clearest way of communicating it. Now, what many people do is the opposite. They try to look clever by rushing lots of information out, and they think more is more. So in the case of Lucy's incredibly complicated table, I think the answer is, what is the one story you really need this to tell? and find a way to break it down and tell that story well. Or maybe you need 10 tables to say what your data has to say. And maybe in that presentation, you can only tell one of those stories, but it's the quality of your thinking that determines how well you can communicate. Any other comments or thoughts coming in?
Well, basically, yeah. I think Lucy has already taken that, yeah, information. Do you have other tips for great graphics?
Well, yeah, there's all the usual stuff about avoiding certain colors and how you have to check how things look in the real medium in which you're going to show it. And because there are many ways you can be caught out. You can think you have a beautiful graphic and then find that when it's displayed, there is no difference between the different elements that looked so fabulous in all their different key elements. But anyway, we're trying to share some good examples here. There is more information in the details we send out, and perhaps people who attended today can try out some of these ideas and edit each other's data and graphics. We were going to mention where to get images from. For this presentation, I decided to use the same theme and just to choose the little 3D person, simply to add a graphical element and a bit of colour to each slide. But I wanted it to be in the same. I don't like clip art because I think it looks cartoonish and childish. So, you know, in my field, what I will often do is to use my very own photographs because I know I own the copyright, but to try and keep things simple. There are Creative Commons images available that are very easy to get hold of, and you're not infringing anyone's copyright. EULAR have an ultrasound library where you can access various pictures, and so there are many places where you can access and use images. Any other thoughts on that, colleagues?
I usually get my icons from the Noun project. In fact, I got myself a license so that I can use them always. I don't have to pay each time.
Yeah, I think it's quite good to get a sort of evolve a style that you're, you know, so that things look like they are yours. And so in that case, it is worth investing a little bit in being able to access some particular pictures. But for you with research, you know, if you own that data and that material, then you know that you are entitled to use it, so long as you have cleared that with patients, of course. So I now want to move onto the closure section, and this is bound to go wrong, but we're absolutely on target time-wise for what I was hoping. So let's see if we can bring about a satisfying closure, because it would be embarrassing if we failed while we're thinking about that thing itself. So guess what helps us to produce a satisfying closure? If we limit the information, if we illustrate it well, if we check and build in enough time to check that it's been received, then that makes it much more likely to achieve satisfying closure. Now, here's another aspect that's interesting about bringing things to a close. The traditional pattern in presentations was always to bring it to a close and then open it up again and ask questions. So you have everything in a nice parcel, and then you just open the floor to and give away control, and then it's very hard to bring things back to a satisfying conclusion. So if you're able to, some expert advice is to invite questions before you do a little summarising closing passage. And what that does is it allows you to take questions and bring things together and keeps it in your control. So we've invited you all the way through today in this presentation to put your questions, but now is the time. Any last questions before I bring things to a close?
Oh, we have a great one here.
Oh,
Catherine,
good.
it's how to check it has been received. May be difficult in conferences with large rooms.
That's very, very true. And what this virtual environment has taught us is we have to try and do this without even body language to guess. So usually in a room, we are monitoring the way humans are behaving. Are they looking alert and with good energy? And do we have eye contact? That's good. People are paying attention, they are listening. Or are people shuffling about, leaving, walking off, not watching? And all of that channel has been switched off for us in this virtual environment. So one of the things apart from observation is you can tell if people have been paying attention and received your message by the quality of the questions that they ask you. In an ideal world, the questions they'd ask you would be these sort of questions. They would be taking the perfect opportunity for your chance to do a little customized extra presentation, which is what you'd really like to tell people but didn't squeeze it into the body of the main presentation. And now you can just catch that question or refer it to another expert and give an answer to it. So if people ask you a question that is unrelated to what you've been talking about or demonstrates misunderstanding of what you have been trying to convey, you have one last opportunity to put that right. And in the real world, you would be able to see if everybody turns and looks at that person astonished, then everybody else got the message and they weren't listening. But if everybody sits forward and looks interested, you have another opportunity to put that right. And I think increasingly we will have ongoing chat like we're doing here, or voting, or various ways of interacting so that we can make sure and check as we go along that people are receiving what we are telling them in the way we intend. That's just a start, because I would recommend slightly under answering before you move on, because you cannot unsay things. Any other questions?
Oh, no, the question you already answered. Yeah.
That's great. So what that means is that I can now move on to the next part of a satisfying closure, which is to try and summarize those very main points. And you're doing that and you're wanting to leave people with a sense that their time has been well spent, and that you have enjoyed being there. That's also something for the start, of course. If you look like you're about to be shot, then people will not get the idea that you have enjoyed being there. So it simply means saying and meaning it. Thank you for this great opportunity to talk about my work on progressing whatever it is, and I hope we can continue our scientific conversations. And I think everybody knows really that at a conference, the presentation isn't where the really detailed and end of story is. The presentation is where you select who you would like to go and talk further with, because they are in the similar area to you. And that you're really sort of advertising that you can have deeper, more useful conversations. And I think this is also an important one. The closure at the end, that is not the place to quickly add new information, because you've carefully made things nicely come to a closure and answered their last questions, and so you don't want to open things up again. So my question to you, anybody got any other tips, things they've seen happen that bring a presentation to an end? I've certainly seen somebody just have the microphone taken off them as a way to get them to shut up. But I rather hope there are better ways to conclude presentations. Any suggestions?
Oh, Maria says, what about future perspectives, directions, or aims?
That's great. And do you know what? In the questions section, it's always good to have one of your friends, colleagues, your supervisor, colleague there to say, by the way, where are you hoping to go next with your research? Because that's just a lovely question, isn't it? Which allows you to tell them a little more. That's known as planting somebody in the audience. Any other tips to share?
Yes, here. What do you think about letting the conclusion slide shown during the question and answers turn instead of closing with the thank you one?
Yeah, that's a nice one, isn't it? So close with what you want them to have as their takeaway message. Yes, that's a very good idea because that's on the screen for a long time. So you probably want your key messages and how to contact you on display for that whole time.
Here we have another one who says likes to end with a funny cartoon that summarizes the topic.
Yeah, if you're lucky enough to have found a great summarizing cartoon, then yes, use it, and that will be your calling card.
What about a beach or something really nice at the end? Is it okay?
Well, I think so. I mean, it's almost like an advert. If you want to associate yourself with that image, it will help you to stand out from other people. And let's face it, when you've seen a lot of presentations in one day, it is very hard for something to stand out for the right reasons. I certainly think maybe a nice calming slide at the beginning is helpful while you get into the swing of things. So yes, I see no reason why that couldn't work well. What I'd like you to do is to look at over the next few days the presentations and things with well, it's meta information, this. So you're not only evaluating the content of those presentations, I want you to be aware of how they are being done as well, so that you can, frankly, steal everybody's good ideas and use them.
Here they say most likely everybody's closing with acknowledgement. Sometimes they take a lot of time in there.
Yeah. I remember the slide you had in the after slide, it just had a little bowing person to say, yes, we acknowledge these people. Even the films, the credits at the end of a film, they go by too fast for anybody to read them, but nobody could complain that they weren't acknowledged because they were, but it didn't use up valuable screen time.
Yeah, well, Xavier said that she gets the acknowledgement out of the way at the beginning, so she can leave her key point slides at the end.
Yeah, and that's quite a nice idea because it means that you get warmed up on a sort of basic slide that you're not going to worry too much about. It's a bit like, I don't know, writing your methods section first because it's the least difficult bit of a paper because it's just descriptive. You know, you don't have to think that hard about it, and it makes you feel you've got everything underway. So yeah, that's a nice tip.
And I like Kathy's idea to change the sound of the voice so that those who were not listening then do.
Oh yes, and I think having a very dramatic pause.
Yes.
And looking at people really makes people, oh goodness, has she got what's happening? That's quite a confident way of getting people to refocus again.
Well, Sebastian asked that he comments that some speakers show pictures while giving the presentation, sort of cutting to regain people's attention. What do you think about this?
Oh, I've just had a horrible flashback to a chemistry lecturer who thought that putting a picture of a girl with not many clothes on in the middle of a chemistry lecture was acceptable practice. That was only in the 1990s. I think you need to use such things with great care. But I'd certainly think that the enemy of a good presentation is habituation, which means whatever you do, if you keep doing it, it will become expected and therefore a bit boring soon. And so you will need to, whatever you do, vary it.
Yes, I think people sometimes try too hard with those pictures.
Yes.
That's it.
Okay, so I've got just one little test and then some, she says lightly. So this is my test. So out of all of these slides, which do I think is the most important slide? I think I said that as I went through, and you're of course entitled to have a totally different answer. But for me, the take-home message is it's the quality of your thinking that determines the quality of your presentation itself. And so my key slide is about the thinking that you do before making your presentation. And in fact, you may find that you have to go around this a little bit and check that you have still kept to what you decided. So in other words, you can always improve your thinking as you go through producing your slides and then, take some out. So I brought things to a conclusion, and we now just have some resources I wanted to alert you to. This is one of my favorites. This is the great Hans Rösling, who with his Gapminder organization does the most exciting visualizations and animations of data to do with health, and they're all available free for us to use. And this is World Health from in the last 15, oh yes, so just in 5 years actually, what's happened in that time. I'm not going to show it to you now, but I'm going to encourage you to go and have a look at that for his great skill in graphically showing complex health information. And other resources we have here, this is an old-fashioned clip, so a bit funny but a bit embarrassing these days. And here is a presentation from the future. This is Hans Rösling before he died, and he shows 120,000 numbers in under 5 minutes, and he does it as if he's in a sci-fi movie, presenting them in mid-air. He doesn't even have a screen. Now, we don't yet have that camera team and technology available, but we are on our way. You can already see, because we're in a virtual congress. And then here are some links to some very rich resources that we found to recommend to you as you're thinking about this area. And then this very last point, we thought we should find an example of the EULAR president talking about people with RMDs. And it's a short clip of Ian McInnes talking very informally about people and suffering. So very non-technical subject. So a different area of expertise that you have as communicators, as clinicians, because you're teaching patients and you're communicating with people every day. So I just wanted to bring that session to a close there and say thank you very much indeed. We've just hit the time target, so I think we should wrap up now and hopefully send this information back to you now that you've attended. So thank you very much indeed for your participation.